The sound from them is absolutely fantastic for that type of audio. These might just be my current favourite ever for gaming. At first glance, you'd be forgiven for thinking that I'm holding a regular pair of DT770 Pros here, but what's actually going on is that Beyerdynamic have now reached 100 years in the audio industry, making microphones, headphones, etc. And to celebrate, they've released the DT770 Pro X. So this is a special limited edition DT770, and what makes it a bit special is it's using the driver technology from the Pro X range, the DT700 and 900 Pro X, but tuning it and delivering it in a DT770 package. And so of course the question for us to talk about today is whether that makes for a good headphone or whether they should have just stuck to the original. One of the benefits of the DT770 version of the Pro X range, rather than say the DT700, is that the DT700 comes in at $299, whereas the DT770 comes in at just $199 and yet they're both using the same driver technology as I mentioned before. They are differently tuned, as we'll talk about soon though. And so what you're getting in terms of specifications in the 770s is a closed-back dynamic driver headphone with an impedance of 48 ohms and a sensitivity of 98 decibels per milliwatt. The other couple of things worth mentioning is that the headband system is the same as the original DT770, so it's still the spring steel wrapped in this nice padded band. They've added a bit of extra comfort to these by creating a small gap at the top of the head, and so they've actually added a gap there to take pressure off the top of the head and disperse it more across the sides of the head. That's great, but other than that, it's the same as the old DT770 headband. But something that they haven't kept the same, and I know many people are going to be very happy about, is that you do now have a detachable cable using the same 3-pin XLR system that's on the DT700 and 900 Pro X. It's good in the sense that you've now got detachable cables, so you can have different length cables. You can use their USB adapter cable if you want to. It gives you the ability to replace cables if they get damaged. Where it's maybe not so good is that for those of you that did want a balanced headphone, you still can't run these balanced. They've only got 3 pins for connection. They can only use a common ground, and so there's no way, short of modding them, there's no way to get a balanced connection if you care about that. These are really directed more at professional use. The idea of these is that they're a workhorse production type tool, and for that setup, you really don't need balanced connections. Even though Beyerdynamic might be directing these at professionals, there's a very specific group that I think will absolutely fall in love with these. These could be my favourite ever gaming headphone. They have a tuning that just absolutely suits gaming down to a T, and I'll tell you all about that in a minute. Before we get there though, let's talk about sound quality in general, and what you're getting with the DT770 Pro X is a generally V-shaped tuning. Much like the original 770, which I have heard but don't own, I haven't got measurements to share with you a direct comparison of these, but based on reputation and what I remember of a brief listen, these are still carrying that same V-shaped tuning. So you've got nice punchy, solid bass, slight dip out through the mid-range, and then plenty of treble energy. Potentially too much for some people, as we'll talk about, but I think they're actually really enjoyable for a V-shaped sound. What that does mean though, and this is kind of interesting given that Beyerdynamic pushed these as more of a pro headphone, they're really not a reference tuning. They're an insightful headphone in the sense that you can hear a lot of what's going on in a mix, in an edit, etc. But if you were going to use these for tonal accuracy, you're going to have to adapt to their sound and tune according to the fact that they have got emphasis. So that's kind of a curious choice, but that's what the DT770 has always been. A big part of that, as I've already mentioned, is that they've definitely got some enhancement in the treble, and that can make some sounds like cymbals just a little bit unnatural. But the good news is that thanks to the driver being used in here, that being the one from the rest of the Pro X range, that treble's never harsh or aggressive or edgy. It's enhanced, it's a little bit bright, but it's very nicely controlled. That treble emphasis brings forward a lot of sense of detail, but I say sense of detail because it's kind of fake detail. It's not that it's actually giving you more detail than say a 700 Pro X, which I'll do a full comparison with these in a moment. It's not actually giving you more than those, it's just drawing your attention to it because it's boosting those frequencies. And that's where it's fantastic for things like gaming, but it's not actually outperforming something like a 700 Pro X. And it's just worth keeping that in mind. If you hear people talking about these as detail monsters, yes, they are in the sense that they draw your attention to them, but the driver's not doing anything magical in terms of pulling out extra details that other headphones at about the same price aren't going to present to you. They're all going to be presenting it. It's just a question of where the emphasis lies. If we think down at the other end of the scale now and talk about the bass is really enjoyable from these. It's enhanced, so it's punchy and solid, but it's super quick, super tight and controlled. Very, very enjoyable. And I think that's actually a lead into what's most impressive about the DT770 Pro X, and that's its sense of speed and its sense of clarity and transparency. These are a nimble, agile sounding driver that just brings out lots of detail and speed in the music, partly because, as I said, of that treble tuning, but also because they're just so responsive. You get the sense that the driver in here is always under control, it's never overshooting the mark, it's not distorting significantly, not audibly anyway, and so you're getting a sense that what you're hearing is what you're meant to be hearing, albeit with a bit of coloration from the tuning. If we then think about staging, the staging's very good for a $199 closed-back headphone. These aren't going to go and beat something like a DCA E3 or a Mesolyric 2, but for what you're paying, they're excellent. And where they're particularly good is that the way these have been tuned, they separate the mids, the bass and the treble really beautifully. And so you get this very clear and distinct sense of where each sound is coming from. It's not overly separating things to the point that it becomes incoherent, but it certainly pulls everything apart in a way that helps you understand every piece of the music. The soundstage overall isn't huge, it's not expansive, but there's good separation across the board and a reasonable amount of depth for a closed-back headphone, and that's fantastic. And so where I'd sum up the sound of these before we get into some comparisons to put them further into context, is that I think these are a very enjoyable, very well-tuned headphone if you like that V-shaped, fun, kind of Beyerdynamic house sound, what we got to know of Beyerdynamic from the past. It doesn't fit the tuning of something like the DT700 or 900. These are a totally different voicing. But if you like the old DT770, DT880 type sound, these are really, really fun. Having said that, as I've already alluded to, they can get a bit fatiguing because they are a bit bright in the top end. It's well controlled, it's well managed, but there's definite emphasis up there. And so these might be at their best if you're running a smoother setup with, say, an R2R DAC. Maybe you've got something like an X-Duo TA20 Plus hybrid tube amp. That's where they're really going to be great. But having said that, I've been running them from a very resolving solid-state system and still enjoying them a great deal. Where these really, really excel, in my opinion, is for gaming. Putting aside music for a moment, because that's what the comparisons are going to be about, if we just think about for gaming, these things are absolutely brilliant. I've been playing a little bit of No Rest for the Wicked in early access. I've also tried this on a couple of other games like Red Dead Redemption 2, and the sound from them is absolutely fantastic for that type of audio. The bass is punchy and quick, so when you need explosions or things of gravity and a sense of scale, these absolutely deliver on that rumble, that punch, that thump when you need it. But then because of the treble emphasis, they also do a very good job of bringing out little tiny environmental details and the sounds that are going on around you. You've got excellent spatial information and spatial positioning on these. And then finally, for those that are into more dialogue-heavy games, the mid-range is very well separated, as I talked about before, and so you can really focus in and hone in on the dialogue, understand what's being said, and understand everything that's happening. All of that they're doing absolutely beautifully. And so whilst there's far more expensive headphones that are going to be better for music, these might just be my current favourite ever for gaming. These are going to be the headphones I'm going to be reaching for when I'm playing things like No Rest for the Wicked, the Elden Ring DLC when it eventually drops, all those sorts of things. So if you're in the market for a gaming headphone, you should definitely check these out, but do remember that they are a limited edition and I don't know how long that's going to run for. But for now, let's get back to talking about music, which is where my channel normally focuses, and do a comparison with the more expensive but similar driver design in the DT700 Pro X. If you're not familiar with the previous Pro X models, we've got the 700 as the closed back and the 900 as the open back, and these are both $299 and they're using, as I've already said, the exact same driver as the 770, but they're tuned very differently. Listening to a bunch of tracks, but making my notes on the track Easy Money by Billy Joel, and as you'd expect, the 770 started off very enjoyable, very crisp, punchy, a little bit V-shaped, a little bit unnatural, but thoroughly enjoyable. I did find that the top end was too bright from the 770s on this particular track, and that meant that some of the percussion, the drums, cymbals, snares, etc., that was a little bit over-enhanced at times for me from the 770s. At the other end of things, the bass is super enjoyable from the 770. It's tight, it's punchy, so both the kick bass and particularly the bass guitar on this track were just a joy from the 770. And overall, all of the instruments sounded excellent. Very crisp, very clean, very controlled. Billy Joel's vocal in this track from the 770s is fantastic. It's well separated. And I say fantastic, what I mean is it's wonderfully separated, very clear, very clean. It's not recessed as some V-shaped headphones can do. However, the track has got a bit of edge to it the way it's recorded, and the 770s do go just a little bit too far there. At times I find it a little bit fatiguing, and I want to reach for the volume control because it's just a little bit too much. Moving over then to the 700s, which I'd previously thought of as quite a warm and punchy and bass-oriented close-back headphone. Moving over now, what I heard was a completely different sound. The bass guitar that I mentioned before now has more weight and body to it. It's overall a smoother and richer sound from the 700, but it's very interesting because it's not actually got more bass, it's just a smoother, more linear bass. There's more of a lump in the bass from the 770 that gives you that punch, that thump, and that sense of speed, whereas the smoother and more linear transitions through the bass from the 700s make it have a sense of fullness that the 770 doesn't. Thinking briefly about the treble from the 700s is much more pulled back compared to the 770, and whilst on one hand it's great because I enjoy it from a less fatigue, more easy listening point of view, I did kind of miss the sense of clarity and transparency, albeit potentially artificially done. That sense of transparency and clarity that the 770s gave me, that was now missing from the 700s in comparison. Now overall, if I let myself adjust more to the 700s, they do sound right, they sound fine, they're not muddy or lacking in that. It's just that the 770s are so beguiling with that initial sense of clarity they deliver, but you do have to take it with a dash of fatigue if you're anything like me. Billy Joel's vocals from the 700s sound better. It's richer, but not thicker. It just has a more sense of complete body to it. Having said that, it's probably not separated quite as cleanly from everything else as the 770s do, so it's a little bit of a trade-off, but I think the 700s are probably more correct. And on that note, I think overall, the staging is quite similar in terms of size and shape and scale of soundstage. However, I think the 770 with its tuning does separate things just a little bit better overall. And so if I had to summarize between the two of these, and again, I've listened to multiple tracks, it's not just on this one track, across multiple tracks, I think the 700 is the better balanced headphone in terms of tuning. I think if you want something that's closer to a reference tuning, it's not exactly reference, but closer, the 700 is definitely it. But what you're missing out on with the 700 is that wonderful sense of speed and clarity and transparency that the 770 delivers. And so it's a bit of a trade-off. As I've said a few times now, it's slightly artificial what the 770 is doing. It's actually tricking you into thinking it's faster and more transparent and with better clarity. It's just about how the tuning is drawing your attention to things and breaking things apart a bit more. And so I think both are excellent, and it's going to depend on what you want. If I had to reach for one headphone all the time, I think the 700 is the one that I would actually want. But as I said before, if I wanted one for gaming, the 770 is hands down the one I'd go for. It's just so much fun there. Of course, the other place that some people might lean towards the 770 is if you're just looking for a fun and energetic headphone. Maybe it's not going to be your headphone that you're going to listen to every single time you listen to music, but maybe you want a headphone that you can reach for those specific times that you want an energetic, lively, and exciting listen. That's where the 770s could actually be a better choice than the 700s. But I have to leave that part of it up to you and how you're going to use them. And so I nearly stopped there, but before I did, I had to think about pricing. And obviously there's $100 difference between the 770s and the 700 Pro X. And so I had a bit of a look around to see what else might you look at about $199. And the most obvious, and in my opinion, one of the best closed back headphones around that price is the Rode NTH100. But the reason I reach for these is they're very similar headphones. You've got a closed back headphone designed for sort of professional use, even though none of these three are actually particularly reference or neutral. You've also got a detachable cable on the NTH100, and so there's a lot of reasons to compare these two to each other. Now, there have been some durability issues with the Rode NTH100. I've had no problems with mine, and from what I've heard, any of the issues, which is to do with the adjustment system up here, any issues have been replaced free of charge by Rode, and that's fantastic. And so there's a good chance that you might be looking at the Rode NTH100 up against the DT770 Pro X. Straight away, I'm going to tell you from a gaming point of view, it's not even close. Get yourself the DT770s unless you specifically want the boom mic on the 100M version of the Rodes. But if you're looking at it for music, let's have a talk about how they perform. For this round of testing, the track that I stopped to make my notes on was Do Ya by ELO, and the 770s, you already know what to expect. Crisp, punchy, energetic. The cymbals are a touch edgy once again. The soundstage has a wonderful sense of depth on this track from the 770 Pro X. And there's a lovely sense of presence from the deep bass in this track on the 770s. Moving over to the 100s, and they immediately sound quite boxy after coming across from the 770s. The NTH 100 does have a bit of a mid-range emphasis or a mid-range boost. It's one of the reasons I really like them for a lot of applications. But coming between the two of them, it makes them sound unnatural. And it took a while for my ears to kind of adjust to that sound. As I listened for longer, the 100s are a much more forgiving listen. They're probably the better headphone for extended listening sessions. They're a little bit more laid back. They haven't got quite the same sense of energy. And that can be good and bad, but it does make them less fatiguing and therefore, as I said, better for longer sessions. As my ears adjusted to the very different tonalities, something else that I noticed was that the NTH 100 was actually bringing forward a lot of mid-range detail that I couldn't get from the 770s. Again, this is one of those fake detail things. It's not that the 770 can't do it, but it's being masked by the bass and the treble, whereas in the 100s, that's actually the primary sweet spot is in the mid-range, and so you're hearing the details there, but you're going to miss out on some of the treble details because they're now secondary compared to the DT770's version. Listening a little bit further, the other thing that I would pull out between the two of these as a key difference is that the staging isn't as strong from the 100. It produces a smaller stage, there's less separation of sounds, it's not a bad or congested sounding headphone, but it can't quite match the staging that the DT770 Pro X delivers. And so as I listened on and on between the two of these, they are still two headphones that I thoroughly enjoy. I would mostly use, and I do mostly use, the Rode NTH 100 for casual listening, for maybe watching a movie where I don't want sort of in-your-face energetic sound. I just want it to be relaxing and easy to listen to. Whereas, as I've already said, I would absolutely turn to the DT770 Pro X for things like gaming. If I'm doing editing of videos, it will be the Rode NTH 100 because I think they're a little bit more helpful in terms of their overall tonal balance. They're also less fatiguing. And so I see more applications where the Rode NTH 100 probably makes a little bit more sense, but they're not ever going to come close to giving me the sense of fun that the 770 Pro X does. And that probably leads nicely into my conclusion about the Pro X. That being the DT770 Pro X. These are a headphone that I think would belong in a collection alongside other headphones. I don't know that these make sense for a sole headphone, unless you particularly love that energetic V-shaped type sound. I think if you're in a situation where you're going to have multiple headphones, and so you can have these for your energetic, fun and exciting listening, but then also have a pair that's a bit more relaxed to listen to, that you don't have to think about the source chain or the quality of the content, that's where I think these could really work well. And that's where I think it's cool that at only $199 US, and I say only because there's so many headphones costing so much more, but I think for only $199, you can afford to have a pair of these alongside other gear. These could easily live alongside a pair of HEADPHONEs or Meza Audio or Focals or one of those other brands where you might be going for a more premium, high-end sound. And then these are sort of the guilty pleasure, gaming, super fun, energetic listening. That's where I see these at their best. And all paired up with a hybrid amp, something that smooths off some of that treble and really lets these shine without being fatiguing. As always, I hope you found the video useful and helpful. If you have, please hit the like button and subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. For now though, let me leave it to the music, so happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.